This is a serious passage, and so let me begin with a serious question. Have you ever been greatly distressed? Have you ever been greatly distressed? When was that? What was that time? What was it like for you? Remember that. What was it like being greatly distressed, and what caused it? What do you think would make Jesus go through great distress? Why? What would cause Jesus great distress? I mean, just think who he is and what he had done. Here is the man who had come face to face with Satan. Here is the one who had slept through a massive storm in the sea, completely untroubled. Here is the one who had healed the sick, cast out the demons, raised the dead, and yet now he is distressed and troubled like never before. Why? And here is the one who in his great distress prays to his Father, and yet even though he is in such great distress, his Father refuses to give him what he asks for. Why? There are some passages which make us think hard, and there are some passages which move us deeply. And this passage does both. We're going to be focusing, as the passage does, on Jesus, but in order to focus on Jesus, I want to begin with his sidekicks, with his disciples. And so firstly, let's have a look at how Jesus foretells all of this to the disciples before we see what happens. He foretells to them in verse 26. When they had sung a hymn, they went to the Mount of Olives, and Jesus said to them, "You will all fall away. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee." Peter said to him, "Even though all fall away, I will not." And Jesus said to him, "Truly I tell you, this very night, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. But he said emphatically, "If I must die with you, I will not deny you." They all said the same. They've just shared the Passover meal together. Jesus had given them bread, saying he was giving his body for them. Jesus had given them wine, saying he was pouring out his blood for them. Jesus had also given them warning. One of them would betray him. And now Jesus gives them even more bad news. You'll all fall away, he says. You'll all fall away. The shepherd will be struck and you will be scattered. You, my sheep, will be scattered when I, the shepherd, am struck. And it has to happen. It's written. When Jesus says it is written, it's as good as done, because that is God's plan. It's written in Zechariah 13:7, and so it must happen. But he will be raised, and it's only after he's raised that he will regather these ones who are scattered. But let me pause there and ask a question of you. How would you feel if Jesus said that to you? There you are with him, you just shared together with him, and he says to you, you're going to fall away. How would you feel? Peter's response is heroic. Peter says, even if they all fall, and he points to the other guys with him, even if they all fall, I won't. I would rather die than deny. I'll die with you rather than deny you. And all of them actually rally, don't they? They all rally. You notice the last verse that we're looking at there. We'll die with you. They all said the same. We're in this together, Jesus. And you just wonder, a glimmer of hope maybe that, that part in the action movie when the hero assembles his team. Every action movie has that montage when they're assembling the team, and then the team will go in together and they'll conquer and they'll win. And you wonder, is this that moment when the team is starting to rally? But Jesus says to them, guys, you won't last the night. He says to Peter, Peter, not only will you deny me, but this very night you're going to do it 3 times. So we move from the foretelling to the disciples to the failure of the disciples. Pick it up in verse 32. And they went to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." And he took with him Peter and James and John, and he began to be greatly distressed and troubled. And he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch." The word watch could also be translated stay awake. Remain here, stay awake, watch, because you must pray. And going a little farther, he fell on the ground and he prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will." And he came and he found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "Simon, are you asleep? Could you not watch for 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." And again he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And again he came and he found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy and they didn't know what to answer him. And he came a third time and he said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? It's enough. The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let's be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." Gethsemane means olive oil press. And now the pressure is on. Jesus is overwhelmed by the distress. And yet even in his distress, I want you to notice his concern is for them. Even as he is going through overwhelming distress, he's concerned about them. He says to them, "Watch, stay awake, pray, that you may not enter into temptation." You see, his concern is still for them. He's not saying, "Pray for me." He's saying, "Pray for yourselves." His overwhelming concern through this is for them. But as Jesus is overwhelmed with distress, the disciples fail dismally. 3 times Jesus goes a little way apart from them to pray. 3 times he goes to pray and he leaves them to pray as well. And then 3 times he comes. And each time, 3 times, he finds them asleep. And it's emphasised in the passage. So let's have a look at it just to see. It's kind of underlined. You see it in verse 37. And he came and he found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "Simon, are you asleep?" And then if you drop down to verse 40, he came again and he found them sleeping. And then you see it in verse 41. And he came the 3rd time and they are still asleep. I wonder if that rings any bells for you. 3 times, stay awake. 3 times, they fall asleep. Come back with me into chapter 13. Come with me to chapter 13 and have a look what he warned them in verse 32. But concerning that day or that hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Be on your guard, keep awake, for you do not know when the time will come. It's like a man going on a journey when he leaves home and puts his servants in charge, each with his work, and he commands the doorkeeper to stay awake. Therefore, stay awake, for you don't know when the master of the house will come, in the evening or midnight or when the rooster crows or in the morning. Lest he come suddenly and find you asleep. What I say to you, I say to all, stay awake. Stay awake as faithful servants. And now the hour has come and they're in the olive press. They're in the Garden of Gethsemane, and what happens to the ones who've been called to be faithful? They turn out to be failures, don't they? They're failure servants, not faithful servants. And now the hour has come. In contrast to their failure and faithlessness, notice Jesus' faithfulness. He prays to his Father. He says, "Not what I will, but what you will. Not what I will, but what you will." And I want to ask you, is that a prayer of faith or is that a prayer of faithlessness? Is it praying in faith to say, "Not my will, but your will"? There are some people who would say to us, that's actually praying without faith. If, for example, you were praying that someone would be healed and you prayed for them to be healed and you added to your prayer, "But not what we will, but what you will." There are some people who would say that that is actually lacking faith, to pray that. You just claim it by pray it. Don't put the element of doubt in. But here's the thing, are we really going to accuse Jesus of a lack of faith? And if it's okay for Jesus to pray that way, surely that's how we should pray as well? Not my will, but your will? The thing to realise is it's not Jesus lacking faith, it is actually the very expression of faith. To pray "not my will, but yours" is to trust God that he knows better than you do. And so you pray, "Not my will, this is what I want, but I trust you that you know best. And so in the end, not my will, but yours." Do you see how that's faith, not faithlessness? And it contrasts to the failure of the disciples. And then it culminates in the fleeing of the disciples. We've seen it was foretold to them, they failed, and now they flee. Pick it up at verse 43. "And immediately, while he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12. And with him a crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, 'The one I kiss is the man. Seize him and lead him away under guard.' And when he came, he went up to him, and at once he said, 'Rabbi.' And he kissed him. And they laid hands on him and they seized him. But one of those who stood by drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. Jesus said to them, 'Have you come out against me as against a robber, with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I was with you in the temple, teaching, and you didn't seize me. But let the scriptures be fulfilled.' And they all left him, and they fled. And a young man followed him with nothing but a linen cloth about his body. And they seized him, but he left the linen cloth and he ran away naked." It's kind of comic in one sense, but it makes a very serious point. You don't meet many children named Judas these days, do you? The treachery of Judas is highlighted and it's very ugly. He's one of the 12. Mark doesn't record that because we didn't know that. He records that to underline the treachery. He's called the betrayer, and he betrays Jesus with a kiss. The very sign of respect and honour is used to betray him. Now, let me point out, all the disciples failed, but not all the disciples are Judas. All the disciples fail, but not all the disciples Judas. Don't be a Judas. Very serious warning. Don't be a Judas. That warning applies to all of us, no matter who you are, no matter how long you've been following Jesus. But I want to apply to a particular group within our church, and that is I want to apply to those of you who are growing up in our church as Christians, who are growing up in Christian families, who are growing up in a place where the gospel's taught. You're growing up in the faith, and it's wonderful. What a blessing. Those of us who didn't grow up like that wish we had. You're growing up with it. But you know, it's trendy, and you'll see this online, it's trendy for high-profile Christians to kind of deconstruct their faith these days. Oh, I've believed this since I was a child, but now I've got all these sophisticated objections, and now I realise they give all fancy reasons for not wanting to be a Christian anymore. And they are just fancy ways of saying, I want to become a Judas. Don't be a Judas. Now, Jesus knows this is all a farce, doesn't he? He knows it's a farce. He says, have you come out against me as a robber, Day after day I was in the temple. Do you remember what the temple was called by Jesus? A den of robbers. You've come out against me as a robber? Me? You guys are the robbers. The roles are reversed. He's not the robber, they are, and they are arresting him as a robber, and they will crucify him between two robbers. He knows it's a farce, but at the same time he knows it must happen. It must happen. Let the scriptures be fulfilled, he says. This is my Father's will. It must happen. And so Jesus walks towards it in the same way that he walked towards Jerusalem deliberately. He walks towards it. He doesn't run away. The disciples, on the other hand, flee from it. Jesus walks towards it, they flee. Peter makes his last heroic stand, and we know it's Peter from the other Gospels. He takes his sword and he cuts off the high priest's servant's ear. I can't work out whether Peter was a really good shot or a really bad shot. It could be either, couldn't it? I'm just going to take your ear off, or I meant to take your head off and all I got was the ear. I can't work out which one it was. But there is Peter's last heroic stand. There's something to admire in it, actually. But it doesn't last long, does it? Doesn't last long. And there's new hope in that there's a young man following, we realise. They haven't all abandoned him. Young man here is not a teenager, not a young boy. Young man is the word they would use for a young man in his prime. This is a man of fighting age. This is a young man in his prime. And our hopes are raised, and then he runs away naked. All the heroic words. And finally, Jesus is abandoned and alone. And what he must do next, he must do alone. The disciples are going to play no part in what Jesus must do next. There are two kinds of people in the story here. There are those who win forgiveness, and there are those who need forgiveness. There are those who do the saving, and there are those who need the saving. And it is very, very clear by the time we get to this part of the story that the disciples are in the second group, aren't they? They are in the group that need forgiveness. They are in the group that need saving. And Jesus alone is in that first group. And so we come with the spotlight left focused on Jesus. We come back to his prayer. In the garden, why was he so greatly distressed and troubled? So greatly distressed. Look at his prayer again, verse 35. And going a little farther, he fell on the ground and he prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me. And yet not what I will, but what you will. Speaking of great distress. What distressed him so much? 3 times he prayed. 3 times he prayed the same thing. All things are possible for you. Please not this. All things are possible. Please not this hour. All things are possible. Please not this cup. Take this cup from me. Now, I'm sure that you've met people who are not afraid of death, right? Some of us are afraid of death. Some of us not, though. But why was Jesus afraid of death? Why Jesus? He knew, this is Friday, he knew on Sunday he'd be raised. Why was he so afraid of death? He wasn't afraid of death. It's not the death he was afraid of, it was the cup he was afraid of. And so let me show you that cup. The meaning of the cup comes from the way it's talked about in the Old Testament. God taught us how to think about this cup. Jeremiah chapter 25 verse 15 says, Thus the Lord, the God of Israel, said to me, take from my hand this cup of the wine of wrath and make all the nations to whom I send you drink it. What's in the cup? The wine of wrath. Wrath means strong anger. This is God's anger in the cup. Or come to Isaiah verse 51. Isaiah verse 51, verse 17. Wake yourself, stand up, O Jerusalem, you who have drunk from the hand of the Lord the cup of his wrath, his anger, who have drunk to the dregs the bowl, the cup of staggering. The cup that Jesus wants to pass is the cup filled with God's anger, and he doesn't want to drink it. It's the anger that you and I deserve. It's the anger that people deserve for our rebellion against God, for thinking we know better, for saying to God, not your will but mine. It's the anger that's rightly provoked in God for people like us and not people like Jesus. And so Jesus prays, I want this to pass. I don't want to drink it. The cup is the cup of God's wrath. Jesus knows that he is about to face the strong anger of God. Jesus knows that he is the shepherd who is about to be struck by God himself. Jesus knows in the olive press that he is the one who will be crushed by his own Father. Come with me to Isaiah 53. Verse 4. Surely, now this is written hundreds of years before Jesus. Extraordinary. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we considered him stricken, smitten, that means struck by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We've turned everyone to his own way. And the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. We'll have a look at verse 10. Of Isaiah 53, yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him and to put him to grief. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, not his guilt, our guilt, he shall see his offspring, he shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord will prosper in his hand, not my will but yours. All things are possible, Jesus cries. All things are possible. Please remove this cup from me. And his father says, no, my son. It's my will to crush you. The father says, no, my son, there is no other way. There is no other way to save them. There is no other way to pay for their sin. There is no other way for my wrath to pass over them but to fall on you. Let me tell you about Aaron Rolson. Aaron Rolson is an American mountaineer who's into a crazy sport called solo climbing. It's when you go and you find an impossible cliff to climb or to go down and you climb it all on your own. In 2003, Aaron was making a solo descent in a place called Blue John Canyon in Utah. As he was descending the canyon, and it was just him there, a boulder dislodged in the canyon and pinned his right wrist to the canyon wall. And he was stuck. And there was no one else around. And for 5 days, he tried everything to get free. Tried this, tried that maneuver, tried to dislodge the boulder. For 5 days he tried. After 5 days, he took out his blunt pocket knife and he cut through his own arm. He walked 10 kilometres out and he made it. Why would he do that? Why would he cut his own arm off? Because there was no other way. Why would God refuse the cry of his only beloved Son? Why would he crush him? Why would he pour out his wrath on him? Why would he strike him? because there was no other way. No other way. No other way for you to be saved. It was either you or him. And you deserve it. And he doesn't. And yet Jesus said, I'll take it for them. Let it be me instead. The disciples flee, and Jesus is left alone to do what Jesus alone can do. He alone can pay for our sin. He alone can trade places with us and drink the cup that we deserve. He alone loves us so much that he agreed and said to his Father, not my will but yours. Do you see why your friends need Jesus? Do you see why your family needs Jesus? Jesus alone. There's no one else who did it. Can you see why can you see why the Gold Coast needs Jesus? Can you see why we do what we do as a church? Do you see why we have our mission? It's because of Jesus alone. There is no other way. Do you see why you need Jesus? Do you see why I need Jesus? And have you put your trust in him? Whatever you've done, however you have denied him, however you've failed, you deserve to pay for that. And yet Jesus did it for you. Let's give him thanks and praise. Our Father, we thank you so much that your Son took our place. The wrath that we deserve to face, the strike that we deserve to bear, the crushing that we deserve for our sin and our rebellion and our failure and our denial. Father, for all of that, Jesus paid the price. We give you great thanks and praise for Jesus and for Jesus alone. And we pray in his name. Amen.